I sense a shift coming in the US and maybe the world, but it seems to be really imbalanced right now. Right wing authoritarian leaders keep taking power, and people start to realize that they don't really like these people. The problem is when they take power, obviously they're working to protect their power, and they restrict voting, and they consolidate media, and they're shutting off dissent. There's a lot they can do, and I'm not really an expert on it, but basically, um, you can't really. Once they start taking power, you start losing the institutions that protected us start losing their truth. Um, they don't disappear, they don't lose control, but they start listening to the message that the government, that the authoritarian starts to say, starts to message out, and um, they never stray too far, and that's kind of how it works. They don't always control, they don't take it over and put their person in charge all the time, and they don't follow a script. But it's kind of like code switching for white people, right? You get the message that nobody's too bad or too dangerous in the government. There might be the occasional sacrificial lamb, like Bovino and Nome were removed, but they're not being replaced by anybody who's going to make real reform. And they weren't hurt. I mean, they're probably going to get some consultant job with somebody else who's going to pay them even more money, and they're still going to be part of the in group. Um, and on the other hand, democratic leadership around the world seems to be the same thing, just a slightly kinder face. They don't want to upset the apple cart too much. And when you think about it, you understand why. They're coming from the same place. They've been elected in the same skewed system, and they make it more democratic. If they really make it too free, they're going to lose power too, because they're part of that status quo. I mean, think about it. In the U.S., the Republican Party, it's the party of Lincoln, right? They were the reformers. But over like the past 50 years, they've moved. They've moved from promising assistance to low-income families and protecting Social Security and unions and minimum wages and all of that stuff to what they are now. And the shift happened over time. With each election, someone ran for office who was a bit more right-wing and a bit more right-wing, and they kept calling the other guy rhinos or something like that. And so to be a Republican or conservative, you had to be more and more conservative every election cycle. And they moved so far, 70 years ago or so. And Democrats have been moving with them. They would have gone the other way, right? If they had allowed radicals to start saying, well, you're not a real Democrat, they would have moved to the left. And maybe that would have kept both things kind of equal. But they didn't. They protected their status quo. And to do that, they have moved with the Republicans to the right. So both parties have been moving to the right. Republicans, because they're allowing their radical right wing to move in and take over, and Democrats, because they're protecting their status quo, they've had to move to the right. They've also both grown very elite, right? Check out the net worth of politicians, especially in the federal level. They might come in, and they're never poor generally. They usually come in relatively wealthy, and then their income and their wealth shoots way up. But nothing's illegal here because insider trading is not illegal for Congress. And now this isn't everyone, but that's the thing. It's never everyone, so you can't say it's completely corrupt. It's just that 99% are. At the same time as this has been happening, class mobility for the rest of us has really been freezing or shrinking. The middle class has been shrinking, and they're not going to the upper class. A few people are once in a while, just to let us know that it can happen. But mostly, Wages have been stagnant and profits have been going up, and the wealthy elite have shrunk. The middle class has shrunk, and the lower classes, the poor, I don't know why they call them lower classes, the poor people, the less wealthy people, that class has been growing because it's just the way it is. Now, I grew up in the 80s, and we were really hopeful at that time. I know that's when Reagan took over and kind of turned us towards fascism. But he did that because that was kind of the top of our freedom scale, I guess. And as this slide towards fascism starts nearing its end, it's finally starting to affect straight white males. Marginalized people have known for years that equality has really not been equality for everyone. But we're finally at the point where it isn't handed out based on whether you fit that class of equality. The top being straight white males, and then queer or people who can pass as straight white male. And you got female and queer and Asian and Hispanic and black and female, male, all of that stuff. If you really want to put it into a list, a hierarchical list, you can do that. And that's part of the big problem, right? Because what is most of our power structure? Straight white male. And we all feel like, especially as straight white males, we're going to need to protect that. But as it has changed now, so that even if you are straight white male passing, you may not be in the in group, and therefore your equality is now suspect. So as this is happening, the stories, even in our largest, most conservative media rooms, start to focus on the loss of rights and the dangers of fascism, and the freak out is starting. Meanwhile, anyone who's black or queer or of color, or whatever, or female, they're like, this has actually been happening a lot to us, and I'm glad you're finally waking up to it, but don't start saying this is a new thing, because it's not. Right? I mean, this year in 2026, a black man was killed. Do you even know his name? He was killed on the street by ICE. His name was Keith Porter Jr. We all heard, most of us heard about Renee Good, it's a female lesbian, and people were freaked out about that. And then a week later, straight white male, Alex Pretty, was murdered. And then there was a general strike called. So you could see, I'm not saying that even people who are protesting ICE are in this, but this is why we call it systemic racism, because and part of this is there were 3 people killed in just a couple of weeks, and so that will ramp up anger and action. But it also happened that it was a hierarchy, right? Black, female, queer, white, male. And the response and the amount of press that each got increased, not only because they were second, third in line or happened, but also because they were higher on the hierarchy. But you didn't. How many of the people who have died in ICE? There was like 35 last year in custody. Did you hear about any of them? There were 5 more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more people who were killed in ICE custody this year in the month of January. Have you heard about any of them? Luis Gustavo Nunez Casir, 42, from Honduras. Geraldo Lunes Campos, 55, for Cuba. Victor Manuel Diaz, 36, from Nicaragua. Perde Lee from Cambodia. Luisi Beltran Yanis Cruz from Honduras, Eber Sanchez Domingo from Mexico. Did you hear any of those names? Do we know what happened to them? So, I mean, okay, wasn't on video. They were in custody, so they weren't on the street being arrested. They aren't citizens, but you get the point, right? This is not new. In 1963, Martin Luther King wrote in a letter from Birmingham jail, "I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian, and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes you can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." Those of us who are white, and even more so male, and more so straight, or at least straight passing, have been living in a world where we have not had to deal with the consequences of inequality. We know maybe that stuff happens to other people, but we can still say, they probably deserved it, or that's just a one-off thing. It hasn't hit us in the face. Or maybe it's probably more likely that we don't really want to think about it too deeply. Because if we do, we might realize what it is that has been happening for a long, long time. And we've been wrong not to stand up for the rights of anyone who is in the least bit marginalized, whether they be black or Hispanic or Asian or female or trans or queer or whatever. If we have not been standing up for them, we have been in the wrong. And really, it's hard to admit when you're wrong. But as it continues happening to us, people are finally waking up and realizing, hopefully we can wake up or get angry enough to overcome our shame and stand up for the actual promise of the American dream. You know that thing about equality for all? But it's only started. And most of us have not waken up yet. And I'm really afraid it will take a lot more violence against us to create a strong enough coalition to resist what's going on. How many will it take? And what time will we realize that we need a complete overhaul of our system before it's not going to be enough to toss Donald Trump out. We're going to have to really change everything. We can no longer have a executive branch where somebody can just decide to do stuff and people are too afraid to say or do anything about it. We have to have an executive branch with restrictions on it so that if they overreach by too much, they feel real consequences and they feel them right away. None of this, well, we'll take it to the courts and 2 years later something will happen. It's 2 years is not really a acceptable time for somebody to be in jail or to people to mourn the death of somebody they love. There has to be real time consequences for real time actions. Congress has got to not be allowed to sit on their hands and let stuff happen by doing nothing. The judicial branch has got to stop creating new interpretations of what everybody else understands as wrong just because they can say, well, they meant this 200 years ago. No, it cannot happen that way. And there needs to be something to happen. Sure, maybe it's gerrymandering. We've got to get rid of all of that. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. There are scholars who know more than I do, and they have good ideas, and they have some things that'll work. But right now, nobody wants to even look at reforming the whole system. That's too radical. But that's where we've got to go. We have to tear it all down and start over again. And maybe not go down to the fighting in the streets, hopefully, even though we already are. But we really have to revamp our whole system and create a system, and it can be similar. Create a system that is accountable. And if it's not, we're just going to be back into this seesaw. Fascism, a little bit of democracy. Fascism, democracy. It's going to be back and forth forever until we lose.